6 months after my husband Michael died, I finally found the strength to clean out his beloved old car before selling it. But when I opened the glove box, hidden at the very bottom, I found a sealed envelope with my name on it. I thought it was one last beautiful love letter. I was wrong. It was a confession, a secret ledger, and a terrible truth about his family that would shatter everything I thought I knew about the man I had married. Before we open that envelope, I have a question for you. What's the most surprising or sentimental thing you've ever found in an old car? Let me know in the comments. I love reading those small stories. Okay, let's go back to that quiet, dusty garage. The 6 months since Michael's heart attack had been a colorless, silent fog of grief. I moved through our beautiful, empty house like a ghost. The silence, a constant screaming reminder of his absence. He had been my everything, my partner, my best friend, the vibrant, laughing center of my world. And then, one ordinary Tuesday, he was just gone. The only part of the house I couldn't bring myself to face was the garage. In it, under a gray canvas cover, sat his pride and joy. A beautifully restored 1968 Ford Mustang, the color of a midnight sky. It was his project, his passion. He had spent years bringing it back to life. Our happiest memories were intertwined with that car. Summer drives up the coast with the windows down, the radio playing old songs, his hand resting on my knee. Now it was just a 2-ton monument to my heartbreak. My therapist had been gently suggesting it for weeks. "Eleanor," she'd said, "sometimes to move forward, we have to let go of the physical reminders that keep us tethered to the past. Selling the car might be a healthy step." I knew she was right. So, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, with a heavy heart, I finally found the courage. I walked into the garage and pulled the cover off the car. It was, as always, immaculate. He had kept it in pristine condition. The task of cleaning it out before calling a dealer felt like a final, sacred ritual, a last act of love for him. Just as I was about to start, my phone rang. It was my brother-in-law David with my sister-in-law Sarah on the line as well. They had been, in a word, my saviors since Michael's death. They called every day. They brought over groceries. They sat with me for hours, sharing stories of their brother, their voices thick with their own grief. "Hi, Ellie," David's warm voice said. "Just checking in. How are you holding up today?" "I'm okay," I lied, my voice a little shaky. I was about to start cleaning out Michael's car. I think it's time to sell it." "Oh, honey, that's such a brave, strong step to take," Sarah said, her voice full of a practiced sympathy. "We are so proud of you, but don't you do it alone. We'll be right over to help. We can make it a day of sharing memories." They arrived 20 minutes later, bringing coffee and a box of donuts. For the next hour, they helped. Their help consisted of them sitting on stools in the garage, reminiscing loudly about Michael, while I did the actual work of sorting through his things. And I began to notice, as I always did, that their memories always seemed to circle back to one central theme: Michael's boundless generosity to them. I'll never forget the time he co-signed for my first business loan. Didn't even hesitate. Just said, "Whatever you need, little brother." He always took care of us. And he paid for my master's degree. He said it was an investment in the family. He was just the most generous man I have ever known. We truly don't know what we're going to do without him.
The conversation then shifted, as it often did, to their own current financial worries. A downturn in David's business, a sudden, unexpected expense for Sarah's family. They never asked for anything directly. They didn't have to. It was a subtle, masterful performance of laying the groundwork, of reminding me of their reliance on my late husband, of the role he, and now by extension his estate, was expected to play in their lives. I just nodded along, my heart aching for their loss, for their struggles, feeling a sense of duty to continue my husband's legacy of taking care of his beloved siblings. After they left with promises to call again tomorrow, I turned my attention back to the Mustang. The interior was spotless, just as he had left it. I cleared out a few old CDs from the center console, a pair of his favorite sunglasses from the visor. All that was left was the glove box. I opened it. It was filled with the usual mundane car-related clutter. Old registration papers, service records, a tire pressure gauge, a stack of faded maps from before the age of smartphones. I began to pull everything out, ready to put it all in a box. And that's when I saw it. At the very bottom, hidden beneath everything else, was a thick, cream-colored manila envelope. It was sealed. And on the front, in my husband's familiar, strong, and beautiful handwriting, was a single word. My name. Eleanor. A wave of love and profound sadness washed over me. I thought I knew what it was. It was a letter. A final love letter. A last goodbye he had hidden for me to find one day, a final romantic gesture from the man I adored. I clutched the envelope to my chest, my eyes filling with tears. I sat there in the driver's seat of his silent, beautiful car, thinking it was his final gift of love. I had no idea it was actually his final, desperate cry for help. I sat there in the driver's seat of my husband's Mustang, the sealed envelope a heavy, sacred weight in my hands. The world outside the dusty garage windows seemed to fade away. The grief, which had been a constant, dull ache for 6 long months, now sharpened into a poignant, bittersweet pang. This was it. One last message. One final piece of him. I imagined the words inside, a beautiful, final declaration of the love we had shared, words I could read and reread in the lonely years to come. I prepared myself for the sweet, familiar pain of his memory. I was completely and utterly unprepared for the searing, unfamiliar pain of his truth. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. The paper inside was thick and expensive, the kind he used for important letters. There was more than one page. I unfolded them. At the top of the first page, in his strong, familiar script, were 3 words that sent the first cold spike of dread through my heart. My dearest Eleanor, forgive me. Forgive him? For what? For leaving me too soon? I began to read. If you are reading this, it means you have finally decided to sell the Mustang. And for that, I am both sad and relieved. I am sad because I know how much this car meant to us, how many happy memories we made in it. But I am relieved because I know you are finally beginning to move forward. And I am also relieved because it means you will finally know the truth. A truth I was too weak, too ashamed, and too afraid to tell you while I was alive. The life we had, he wrote, was the only true and good thing I have ever known. My love for you was the one pure thing in a life that had become complicated and ugly. I have not been the strong, successful man you believed me to be. I have been a coward. And my cowardice has cost us dearly.
My confusion deepened. The letter continued, and with every word, a piece of the reality I had known was chipped away. I know you always thought my generosity to my siblings was a virtue. You encouraged it. You saw it as a sign of my good heart, of our family's closeness. But it was not generosity, my love. It was a tax, a tribute. It was the price I paid for a secret I have kept for 15 years. The vacations we postponed, the home renovations we never did, the investments we put off for our own future, that money did not go back into my business as I told you. It went to them, to David, to Sarah. It paid for David's failed business ventures, for his luxury car, for his down payment on a house he couldn't afford. It paid for Sarah's master's degree, for her lavish wedding, for her children's private school tuition. I was not their loving, supportive brother. I was their personal bank. And I did it all because I was trapped. The words swam before my eyes. I pulled out the other documents from the envelope. The first was a small, black, leather-bound ledger. I opened it. Page after page was filled with my husband's neat, precise handwriting. It was a meticulous, heartbreaking record of a decade and a half of financial bleeding. Each entry was a date, a name, and a sum. $15,000 to David, business loan. $25,000 to Sarah, tuition. $50,000 to David, down payment. I flipped through the pages, the numbers growing larger, more frequent, more desperate. I did a quick, rough calculation in my head. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars. A fortune. The fortune we were supposed to have saved for our own retirement. But why? Why would he do this? The answer was in the final item in the envelope. It was a smaller, secondary envelope, brittle with age, marked simply, "Read this last." Inside was a sheaf of yellowed legal documents, copies of a lawsuit from 15 years ago, from before I had even met him. It detailed the ugly collapse of my husband's first business partnership. It showed that his partner, a man I had never heard of, had lost everything, and that there had been accusations of unethical, though not illegal, conduct on my husband's part. It was a story of a youthful, ambitious mistake, a moment of moral compromise that had ruined another man. It was a secret shame he had carried his entire life. And clipped to the front of this was a more recent document. It was a copy of a handwritten letter. It was not from my husband. It was from his brother, David, dated 10 years ago. "Michael," it read, "Sarah and I have been thinking it would be a terrible shame if it were ever to find out about what happened with your old partner. She holds you in such high regard. It would break her heart to know that her perfect husband's fortune was built on the ruins of another man's life. I think, to ensure her peace of mind and to ensure your reputation in the business community remains pristine, it would be best if we all had a vested interest in keeping this unfortunate history in the past. I find myself in need of a small business loan to get a new venture off the ground." It wasn't a request. It was a threat. It was blackmail. The air left my lungs. The garage, which had been silent, was now filled with a roaring in my ears. It all crashed down on me at once. The constant emergencies, the endless loans, the way his siblings would look at him with a certain smug entitlement, the stress I had seen in his eyes in his final months, a stress I had attributed to his work. It wasn't generosity that had bound him to them. It was extortion. They had been holding his past over his head for 15 years, bleeding him dry, all while playing the part of his loving, supportive family. The grief I had felt for my husband, the simple, clean grief of a widow, was gone. It was replaced by a new, more terrible kind of grief. The grief for the man who had suffered in silence for so long, too ashamed to tell me the truth, trapped in a prison built by his own blood. And with that grief came a cold, pure, and diamond-hard rage. I finally understood the heart attack that had taken him from me. They had not just taken his money,
They had taken his peace. They had taken his pride. And finally, they had taken his life. I sat there in the driver's seat of his car, in the cold, dark garage, the terrible secret documents spread out on the passenger seat beside me. The loving, supportive in-laws who had just been in my home, drinking my coffee, comforting me in my grief, were not just liars. They were monsters. The soft, grieving widow I had been just an hour ago was gone. In her place was an avenger. "They won't get away with this," I whispered to the empty, silent car. "I promise you, Michael, they will pay back every single cent, with interest." I sat in the driver's seat of the Mustang for what felt like an eternity, the dark, silent garage my cocoon, the terrible secret documents spread across the passenger seat like a funeral shroud. The rage that had filled me was so pure, so absolute, that it had burned through all my grief and tears, leaving behind a landscape of cold, hard clarity. My husband, my kind, gentle, loving Michael, had not just died, he had been slowly, methodically, and relentlessly bled dry by his own family. His generosity was a lie they had invented. His sacrifice was a secret they had forced him to keep. And his death, I was now certain, was the final, tragic result of their monstrous, silent campaign of extortion. The first thing I did was reach for my phone. I scrolled through my contacts and called the classic car dealership I had been planning to contact. A cheerful salesman answered. "Yes, hello," I said, my voice a calm, steady instrument I did not recognize as my own. "I had an appointment to get an appraisal on a 1968 Mustang. I'd like to cancel it. I've decided to keep the car." I hung up before he could reply. It was a small act, but it was the first. I would not be selling my husband's memories. I was going to turn his car into a war chariot. I gathered the documents, his final heartbreaking letter, the meticulous ledger of his pain, and the damning proof of their blackmail, and carried them back into the house. I was no longer a grieving widow, lost in a fog of sorrow. I was now the custodian of a secret, the executor of a long overdue justice. My mind, which had been clouded with grief for 6 months, was now a sharp, analytical machine. I began to formulate a plan. My first instinct, the hot, primal urge, was to confront them, to call David and Sarah, to scream at them, to throw their years of parasitic betrayal in their faces. But I quickly dismissed the idea. It would be a messy, emotional, and ultimately fruitless confrontation. They were masters of manipulation. They would lie, they would deny, they would twist the narrative, gaslight me, and perhaps even try to paint Michael as a willing participant in their scheme. A shouting match would give them a stage to perform on, and I would not grant them that dignity. My second thought was the police. Extortion was a crime. But I hesitated. A police investigation would mean a public scandal. It would mean my husband's deepest, most painful secret, the business failure, the ethical compromise from his youth, would be dredged up and splashed across the city's newspapers. He had suffered for 15 years to keep that secret, to protect me and our life from that shame. I would not, could not, betray his sacrifice in that way. His memory deserved to be honored, not dissected by a courtroom and the public.
No. The battle had to be fought on the same field they had chosen. They had made this about money. They had used finances as their weapon to control and bleed my husband. And I, as the sole heir to his estate, would use finances as my weapon to destroy them. The ledger was the key. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, meticulously documented as loans. My plan began to form, a cold, elegant, and ruthless piece of legal and financial architecture. I needed to transform that private ledger of pain into an ironclad, legally recognized instrument of debt. I did not call our family's lawyer. He was too close, too embedded in their world. Instead, I spent the next 2 days researching. I found her in the city's legal journal, a woman named Evelyn Albright, a litigation attorney with a reputation for being a shark, a brilliant and relentless fighter who specialized in complex financial disputes. I met with her in her sleek, modern office. I laid out the entire story, the entire set of documents on her large glass conference table. She read everything in silence, her expression unreadable. When she was finished, she looked up at me, and I saw a flicker of something in her sharp eyes, a deep, professional admiration for the battle I was about to wage. "They are vulnerable," she said, her voice a low, confident hum. "But your husband's ledger, while a powerful record, is not a formal loan agreement. They could argue it was a gift. To win this, we need them to acknowledge the debt themselves. We need their signatures." Together, we spent the next week crafting the perfect trap. It was a masterpiece of legal misdirection, a document that looked like an act of grace, but was in fact a loaded gun. We called it a Family Debt Reconciliation and Forgiveness Agreement. It was a formal, legally binding document that listed every single loan from Michael's ledger, line by painful line, and it concluded with a simple statement that I, Eleanor Miller, as the executor of Michael's estate, was formally forgiving the entirety of this acknowledged family debt out of love and respect for my late husband's generous spirit. My part was to be the actor. I had to play the role of the grieving, slightly naive, and financially clueless widow they all believed me to be. I called them, my voice full of a practiced, gentle sadness. "David, Sarah, I've been going through Michael's financial records. It's all so overwhelming. I found his ledger, the one where he kept track of all the money he lent you over the years. I know you both always intended to pay him back, but I want to do something to honor Michael's spirit. I want to forgive the debts, formally. For the estate's tax purposes, my lawyer says we just need to sign a simple document acknowledging the loans and forgiving them. Could you come over on Saturday?" Their relief was a palpable thing, even over the phone. They saw it as the final, perfect resolution to their long and successful con. The dumb, grieving widow was about to let them off the hook, scot-free, and even give them a legal document to prove it. They agreed immediately. They arrived at my house on Saturday, their faces a perfect performance of solemn, loving support. I had Ms. Albright there, my new lawyer, whom I introduced as Evelyn, a notary public, and a friend who was just here to witness the signatures and make it all official. I presented them with the document. I just want to do what Michael would have wanted, and he would have wanted to take care of his family. They didn't even read the fine print. They saw the final clause about debt forgiveness, and their eyes lit up with a greedy, triumphant light. They saw the long, itemized list of every dollar they had ever taken, and they saw it not as a list of their crimes, but as a list of their victories. With broad, confident strokes, they each signed their names on the signature line, acknowledging the full, staggering sum as a formal family loan. Miss Albright, my notary, witnessed and stamped the documents with a crisp, final thud. They hugged me as they left, their hugs feeling like the embrace of snakes. "You have a heart of gold, Eleanor," David had said. "Michael would be so proud of you." I just smiled my quiet, sad widow's smile and watched them walk away, whistling, victorious. I closed the door and turned to Miss Albright. The sad, grieving mask fell away from my face, replaced by a cold, hard expression she had not seen before. She looked at the signed and notarized document in my hand, a legally binding confession, and a sharp, dangerous smile spread across her own face. "They don't understand what they've just done, do they?" she said. "No," I replied, my voice like ice. "They think they've just been forgiven. They have no idea they've just been served." My husband's letter had asked me to forgive him for his weakness, but he had never said a single word about forgiving them, and I had no intention of doing so.
The week following my in-laws' triumphant signing of the forgiveness agreement was a study in contrasts. For them, it was a week of celebration. I saw their posts on social media. My brother-in-law David posted a photo of a brand new top-of-the-line grill with the caption, "Celebrating a little financial freedom." My sister-in-law Sarah posted pictures of her family on a spontaneous weekend trip to a luxury resort. They were confident, relaxed, and utterly secure in the belief that they had gotten away with it all. They believed the final chapter of their long and profitable exploitation of my husband was now happily closed. They had no idea I was about to write the epilogue. For me, it was a week of quiet, focused preparation. My grief for my husband had not lessened, but it had transformed. It was no longer a passive, heavy shroud. It was now an active, motivating force, a cold, clear fire fueling my resolve. I met with my new lawyer, Miss Albright, twice. We prepared our documents. We rehearsed our strategy. I was no longer the soft, emotional widow. I was a client, a plaintiff, a woman preparing for her final, decisive battle. The stage for this final act was to be the formal reading of Michael's will. It was scheduled for the following Saturday at the offices of the longtime family lawyer. David and Sarah, of course, would be there, eager to collect their inheritance, which they now believed would be pure, debt-free profit. I arrived at the law office with Miss Albright on my side. My in-laws were already there, seated in the plush chairs of the conference room. When they saw me with another lawyer, a woman they did not recognize, they exchanged a brief, curious look, but their confidence was unshaken. They likely assumed she was just an estate specialist I had hired to help me navigate the complex paperwork. They looked at me with a new kind of pity, the pity of a predator for its slow, witless prey. They truly believed I had just willingly signed away my only leverage against them. The family lawyer began to read my husband's will. It was a simple, straightforward document, written years ago before the blackmail had begun in earnest. It stipulated that after all estate taxes and debts were paid, his remaining assets were to be divided into 3 equal shares. One for me, his spouse, one for his brother, David, and one for his sister, Sarah.
As the lawyer read these words, I watched David and Sarah exchange a subtle, triumphant smile. This was it, the final jackpot. They had successfully bled my husband for hundreds of thousands of dollars while he was alive, and now they were about to receive another massive final payout after his death. Their victory was total. When the lawyer finished reading, he closed the folder and looked around the table. "If there are no questions," he began, "we can proceed with the execution of the will and the disbursement of the assets." "I have a question." The voice was not mine. It was Mrs. Albright's. She spoke with a calm, clear authority that immediately silenced the room. She stood up slowly. "Before any assets are dispersed," she said, "my client, Mrs. Eleanor Miller, as the sole executor of the estate, has a formal claim to file against the other 2 beneficiaries." David and Sarah stared at her, their expressions shifting from smug satisfaction to baffled confusion. "A claim?" David asked, a short, barking laugh escaping his lips. "What on earth are you talking about? A claim for what?" Miss Albright did not answer him. Instead, she opened her briefcase and pulled out a document. She slid a copy across the polished table to David and Sarah. It was the Family Debt Reconciliation and Forgiveness Agreement they had so eagerly signed in my living room just 1 week prior. "Last Saturday," Miss Albright began, her voice the cool, dispassionate tone of a surgeon about to make an incision, "your clients, Mr. David Miller and Mrs. Sarah Gable, willingly and in the presence of a notary, signed this legally binding document. I believe you will recognize your signatures." They stared at the paper, their confusion deepening. "That's the forgiveness agreement," Sarah said, with a note of suspicion in her voice. "Eleanor forgave our family debts. It's all settled." "Ah," Miss Albright said with a thin, dangerous smile. "This is where we must pay close attention to the legal language. The document you signed is a formal, notarized acknowledgement of debt.
In it, she continued, her voice sharp and precise, Mr. David Miller formally acknowledged a series of outstanding personal loans from his late brother totaling $253,000. And Mrs. Sarah Gable formally acknowledged a separate series of loans totaling $198,000. She let that hang in the air for a moment. The final clause of the agreement, she went on, does indeed outline my client's intention to forgive this combined debt of over $450,000. However, any such forgiveness was legally contingent on a good faith reconciliation and the final orderly settlement of the estate. As you're now attempting to claim further assets from that same estate, you have broken the terms of that good faith. The color was beginning to drain from David's face as he finally horribly understood where this was going. Therefore, Miss Albrecht concluded, her voice like a judge's gavel, we are hereby filing a formal lien against Mr. Miller's and Mrs. Gable's portion of the inheritance for the full, acknowledged, and signed amount of their outstanding debts to the estate. According to the preliminary valuation, their 1/3 shares of the inheritance are estimated at approximately $200,000 each. She looked from David's pale, horrified face to Sarah's, which means, after their acknowledged debts are settled, their final share of their brother's estate will be precisely zero. In fact, she added, consulting her notes, Mr. Miller will still have an outstanding debt of $53,000 to the estate, and Mrs. Gable will be in the clear. We will, of course, not be pursuing the remainder of Mr. Miller's debt at this time. My client is, as you know, very generous.
The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a perfect, inescapable trap having been sprung. I watched as the full weight of what had just happened crashed down upon them. They had been so clever. They had been so greedy. They had rushed to sign a document that promised them freedom, not realizing they were signing their own financial death warrant. Their own greed, their own arrogance, had been the weapon I had used to completely and totally disinherit them. David finally found his voice. It was a choked, strangled whisper. You tricked us. I looked at him then, at my husband's brother, the man who had tormented him in secret for 15 years, and for the first time, I spoke. No, David, I said, my voice cold and final. You tricked yourselves. Michael took care of you his entire life. This is me, finally, taking care of him. The silence in the conference room in the wake of Miss Albrecht's declaration was a living, breathing thing. It was the sound of a lifetime of greed and entitlement finally hitting a solid brick wall. My brother-in-law, David, and sister-in-law, Sarah, just stared at the signed document on the table, their faces a ghastly, uniform shade of white. The forgiveness agreement they had so gleefully signed was not a pardon. It was a confession, a verdict, and a sentence, all rolled into one. It was David who predictably broke first. His shock erupted into a sputtering, impotent rage. This is fraud, he yelled, shooting to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. You tricked us. This is illegal. We will sue you for everything you have, you manipulative witch. Sarah, for her part, simply dissolved into a flood of noisy, self-pitying tears. How could you do this to us, Eleanor? We're family. Michael would be so ashamed of you. The accusation, the sheer breathtaking audacity of invoking my husband's name, was the final straw. I stood up slowly, my own grief for my husband now a cold, hard shield. Ashamed? I repeated, my voice cold but carrying a weight that silenced the room. Ashamed? Michael was ashamed for 15 years, Sarah. Ashamed for a secret that you and your brother used to torment him, to bleed him dry. He was a good, kind man, and you used his goodness as a weapon against him until the stress of it finally stopped his heart. I looked at them, at their shocked, ugly faces. You want to talk about shame. You don't know the meaning of the word. I turned my back on them then. I gave a singy, curt nod to Miss Albrecht, who was already packing her briefcase, her work here done, and I walked out of the room,
leaving them to the wreckage of their own making. I did not need to hear their threats or their tears. I had the only thing that mattered, the truth and their signatures on a legally binding document that acknowledged it. The days that followed were filled with the silence I had craved for months. The barrage of supportive phone calls and texts ceased. My in-laws, my husband's own siblings, were gone from my life. Their lawyer, I was told by Miss Albright, made a few blustering threats about contesting the debt acknowledgement, but it was pure theater. They had no legal standing, and they knew it. They had been outmaneuvered, their own greed the fulcrum upon which my quiet, patient plan had turned. The estate was settled. Their significant inheritance, which they had been so eagerly anticipating, was entirely consumed by the massive debt they had formally acknowledged. They were left with nothing but their own foolishness and the consequences of their long campaign of cruelty. I heard, through a distant cousin, that David was forced to sell his luxury car and his oversized house.
Sarah and her husband had to pull their children from the expensive private school they were so proud of. The quiet, constant stream of their brother's money, which had propped up their lavish lifestyles for so long, had finally, permanently run dry. For a time, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Justice had been served. But the victory felt hollow. My husband was still gone. His memory was still tarnished by the secret he had been forced to keep. A few months later, as I was going through his old files, I found the business plan for his first, failed partnership, the source of his lifelong shame. I read it, and I saw not a story of failure, but one of youthful, brilliant ambition. And in it, I found a new purpose. I used the considerable assets of Michael's now unburdened estate to start a foundation in his name. Not a flashy one like the ones my parents used. My apologies, another protagonist mix-up. Let's correct. Not a flashy one like the ones his siblings would have approved of. It was the Michael Miller Foundation for Ethical Entrepreneurship. Its mission was simple: to provide seed funding and, more importantly, ethical mentorship to young, ambitious business owners, to help them build their dreams without making the kind of compromises my husband had felt forced to make. I was taking the source of his greatest shame and transforming it into a source of hope for others. It's been a year now. The foundation is thriving. I sit on its board, surrounded by a new kind of family, a family of bright, honorable young people who are building amazing things. And I kept the Mustang. It's no longer a monument to my grief. It is a symbol of his true, generous spirit, a memory now purified of the taint of his siblings. I drive it up the coast on sunny afternoons, the wind in my hair, the rumble of the powerful engine of familiar, comforting sound. I realize now that my vindication wasn't about the money. It wasn't about seeing David and Sarah get their comeuppance. It was about this. It was about reclaiming my husband's story. They had tried to make his legacy one of weakness, of secrets, of shame. But I had rewritten it. His legacy is now one of mentorship, of integrity, of second chances. My final act of love for my husband was not just to punish those who had hurt him, but to build something beautiful and good in his name, ensuring that the kindness he had always shown the world would be the part of him that lived on forever. An incredible story of a wife's love, loyalty, and the ultimate intelligent revenge. What do you think of the way Eleanor used her in-laws' own greed against them? Let us know your thoughts on this complex family drama in the comments below. If you were moved by this powerful story of justice for a loved one, please show your support by hitting that like button, and be sure to subscribe for more satisfying stories. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.